from the gift of the givers. Good evening to you both. Let me start with that simple question. Let me start with you, Emily. How bad is the situation? Because you've been on the ground, and why? Various reasons put forward today. The Public Protector saying we need to look at the allocation of resources by the government. Greed, perhaps, or is it just indifference?
Well, first of all, we need to look at, I think the most important reason here is unemployment in our country. So many of our people are unemployed, and that leads to hunger within our country and in our communities.
John?
No, I would agree with Emily there, but I'd also say that we have a low wage economy. So when you have workers that work in supermarkets earning 2,000 Rand a month, and I think there's an average wage that's about 1.5 across the country. So wages are extremely low, and we haven't managed to really address this in the new South Africa in terms of our democracy. And what we really need to address is economic justice, that people, one, can have a decent standard of living, that they can feed themselves properly and adequately, and a lot of that is also nutritional levels, and two, that we can have a different kind of economic sort of growth path and redistribution of wealth.
Looking at it from an economic perspective, it said that we can produce enough food for everybody. And this was an election issue. The EFF was saying we have to focus on making our own food. But does it matter? Because we make a lot of food, but where does it go? Which is what you would say.
Yes, I mean, I think it does matter. I think that we export food as well. And then we have a problem with mining, particularly in Mpumalanga, with the rapid expansion of coal mines in the area. And Mpumalanga has traditionally been seen as the food basket of South Africa, and the water pollution that's taking place, the impact on big agricultural farmers and also small subsistence farmers is of concern. And that's generally a concern around mining, and mining sort of trumps any other sort of sector. So we're not really focusing on food security in this country, one, and then we're not also looking at the cost of food, where most poor households cannot afford to buy food of value.
Are you saying that mining is threatening our food security?
I would say yes. I think it's not regulated properly. We think investment is good for the country, and any kind of investment is good, but that is not necessarily true. There's an impact, and that impact's not being costed. So profits are being made, exorbitant profits within the industry.
Don't we have a lot of regulations, John? Haven't we learned from the past with acid mine drainage and things like that? Isn't our legal framework strong enough now?
Well, we seem to have a fairly good legal framework that's not adhered to, and I think that's the problem. In coal mining, there were, I think 2 years ago, and the figures might have changed now, about 600 sort of coal operators operating without water licenses. So that just tells you that there's very little regulation and of what's actually going on in the industry.
Emily, talking about mining, so you've been on the ground. Gift of the Givers has been handing out food today to those miners. Explain what that's like and what you're seeing.
You know what we're seeing? We're just reaching a small percentage of the miners at the moment, because when we visit a shaft has got about 5,000 people, and we're only handing out food parcels to about 600 families. And when you leave the others standing there with nothing, you cannot help but feel and sense their need for food or their need for help at the moment.
So they are watching as you're giving to some, but it runs out.
But it runs out at the end of the day, yes. And definitely they are watching. And today we just witnessed how many people were disillusioned when they didn't get their food, though.
Is there anger when that happens?
Actually, I can't say that there was anger, but what I can say is that these miners has actually been cooperating with us very nicely in terms of they were orderly, they were well mannered and all that. So whoever didn't get, because what we're doing is we're identifying the poorest of the poor amongst them.
How do you do that? And I want to ask, because we're hearing that miners are hungry, and I'd like to ask you both, where are the problem spots? Actually by the mines, or the Eastern Cape, where a lot of them come from?
Well, I would say both in both ways, by the mines and where they come from, because a lot of these people are from Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and all that areas. So within both the areas, they find that poverty is a reality, and not having food is also a reality with their families and stuff.
John, is hunger real? Are these people starving and still continuing to strike?
I mean, I have monitors on the ground, well, the Benchmarks Foundation has monitors on the ground, and the stories that I get is that workers are walking around, and women are walking around, and children that can barely walk, that they're starving so much.
Sure.
And so there is a very big determination on the Platinum Belt among miners to bring about change in their own lives, not only for themselves, but for their children and for the future of this country. So I think there's an absolute determination. But I think mining is further complicated by the growing levels of inequality generally in the country, and mining leads the way. It's an industry that was making close to 30% returns on investment over 20 years. It's, those returns haven't been as good in the last few years, but they were excessive at one stage. And then we see what the CEOs earn. So this question of inequality needs to be addressed, and we're not addressing that question.
It's a huge debate which we have actually had on the show before, but what I want to put to you is somebody said the miners are really struggling on the salary that they're getting, about 5,500 rand. And there's been speculation that the strike is dragging on because their situation in fact hasn't changed that much. They're so indebted that they weren't benefiting from their salaries. Do you think that's a real situation, or has there been a marked decline because of the strike?
Well, I mean, I think it's a real situation that workers are feeling generally, and not only mine workers. We've seen that with farm workers, and they feel, well, why must I go toil underground, work in really cramped conditions, carrying heavy machinery? What for? Am I any better off working or not working? When you get to that point in a country, then it says we've got a fundamental problem here that we need to address, that we haven't fundamentally transformed our economy. And we have to really look at how do we transform this economy instead of one based on greed and a trickle-down effect, and there's no trickle-down in a sense. So how do we actually transform the industry? Instead of empowering a few elites, how do we empower workers more? How do they get an equitable share of the wealth that they're producing? How do communities benefit? Because communities are also suffering at the moment in and around this strike.
It's huge. Okay, so that's the big picture. And let me ask you this, Emily, because in the meantime, organizations like Gift of the Givers are on the ground trying to do something. How difficult is that to garner resources to get the help you need, and do we need a big coordinated effort, or is it good enough for different organizations to do their own thing?
I think if each organization does the best to their ability, then it can work. But definitely we need more resources, we need more help from our communities, from South Africans.
How much money is donated?
In total, like roughly, I would say about plus minus R1 million has been donated towards the miners' situation, specifically on the miners' situation.
Okay, so that's one situation. Thank you both for coming in this evening. That was John Capel from the Benchmarks Foundation, Emily Thomas from the Gift of the Givers. Well, this points to some of that inequality, the contradictions in our economy right